In an age of giants, one man cast a shadow that stretched across the known world. This is the story of ambition, power, betrayal, and the day that forever changed the course of history. This is the story of the assassination of Julius Caesar. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar, a brilliant general, a masterful politician, and a leader whose boundless ambition began to shake the very foundations of the Roman Republic. From the sprawling city of Rome, his influence grew, fueled by an uncanny ability to win the loyalty of his soldiers and the adoration of the common people. He was a force of nature, a man destined to reshape an empire. As his legions marched, the borders of Rome expanded, and with every victory, Caesar's legend grew. He wasn't just conquering lands, he was conquering the hearts and minds of Rome itself, setting the stage for a confrontation that would define an era. The crucible of his legend was forged in the fires of the Gallic Wars. For nearly a decade, Caesar led his legions through brutal, relentless campaigns across the lands of Gaul. His military genius was undeniable. He outmaneuvered chieftains, besieged formidable fortresses, and commanded his troops with an almost paternal authority. To his soldiers, he was more than a general. He was a comrade who shared their hardships and led them to glory. To the people back in Rome, reading his dispatches from the front, he became a living hero, the embodiment of Roman strength and destiny. But in the hallowed halls of the Senate, this rising popularity was not seen as a blessing. It was viewed with suspicion and fear. Every victory in Gaul echoed as a threat in Rome, a sign of a man whose power was becoming too great for the Republic to contain. The tension between Caesar and the Senate reached its breaking point, fearing his influence and the unwavering loyalty of his armies. The Senate issued a stark ultimatum: disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen. To obey would mean surrendering to his political enemies, facing certain prosecution and the end of his career. To refuse meant open rebellion. On the banks of a small river called the Rubicon, the boundary between his province and Italy, Caesar made his fateful choice. He led his 13th legion across the water, a definitive act of defiance. The die was cast. With that single step, he plunged the Roman world into a devastating civil war, a conflict that would pit Roman against Roman and decide the future of the Republic itself. The civil war was swift and brutal. Caesar's primary rival, the great general Pompey, once his ally and son-in-law, now stood as the champion of the Senate. But even Pompey's military prowess was no match for Caesar's strategic brilliance and the fierce loyalty of his veteran legions. He pursued Pompey across the Mediterranean, ultimately defeating him at the Battle of Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt only to be assassinated, his head presented to Caesar as a grim trophy. With his main opponent gone, Caesar systematically crushed the remaining pockets of resistance across the empire. He returned to Rome not just as a victor, but as its undisputed master. The city celebrated his triumph with unprecedented grandeur, a spectacle that solidified his status as the most powerful man in Rome's long and storied history. Power, once attained, is a difficult thing to relinquish. Caesar was named dictator, first for 10 years and then dictator for life. He sat on a golden chair in the Senate. His statue was placed among those of the gods, and the month of his birth was renamed July in his honor. The common people adored him for his reforms, his generosity, and the stability he brought after years of chaos. But for the old aristocratic families of the Senate, these honors were sacrilege. They watched as Mark Antony, his loyal subordinate, publicly offered him a crown, a symbol of monarchy that the Republic had overthrown centuries before. Though Caesar refused it, the gesture confirmed their deepest fears. In their eyes, Caesar was no longer a servant of the Republic. He was a king in all but name, an unstoppable tyrant whose ambition threatened to extinguish the last flames of Roman liberty forever. In the shadowy corners of Rome, a dangerous conspiracy began to take shape. Fear and resentment united a group of senators who believed that the only way to save the Republic was through a single, violent act. The plot was spearheaded by Gaius Cassius Longinus, a man with a personal grudge against Caesar, and Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus's involvement was crucial. He was a descendant of the man who had expelled Rome's last king, and he was widely respected for his integrity. He was also a man Caesar considered a close friend, almost a son. This betrayal was the core of the conspiracy. In secret meetings, illuminated by the flickering light of torches, nearly 60 men swore an oath. They believed they were not murderers, but liberators, acting to restore freedom. On a table lay the instruments of their design, daggers, ready to strike down the man they saw as a tyrant. The days leading up to the Ides of March were filled with dark premonitions. Strange and terrible omens were reported throughout Rome. Storms raged, eerie lights were seen in the sky, and tales of ghostly apparitions circulated through the city. A soothsayer named Spurina had famously warned Caesar to beware the Ides of March. On the morning of that fateful day, March 15th, 44 BC, Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, awoke from a nightmare in which she held his murdered body. She begged him not to go to the Senate, pleading with him to heed the warnings. Caesar was a man who typically dismissed superstition, but her distress gave him pause. For a moment, he considered staying home. But one of the conspirators, Decimus Brutus, arrived and persuaded him, mocking the omens and insisting the Senate had important business that required his presence. Reluctantly, Caesar agreed. He walked toward his destiny. He entered the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting. As he took his seat, the conspirators gathered around him, pretending to present a petition. One of them, Tullius Cimber, pulled at Caesar's toga, the prearranged signal. Immediately, Casca struck the first blow, a glancing wound to the neck. Caesar, surprised, cried out and fought back, but then the others swarmed him. Daggers flashed in the dim light. He saw senators he knew. Many he had pardoned and promoted, all lunging at him. He struggled, trying to cover himself with his toga, until he saw him Brutus, his friend, his protege, with the dagger raised. It was at that moment his will to fight seemed to vanish. According to legend, his last words were a heartbroken question, Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus. He fell at the base of a statue of his great rival, Pompey, bleeding from 23 wounds, his life and ambition extinguished on the Senate floor. The conspirators had imagined themselves as heroes, believing that with Caesar dead, the Republic would be instantly restored and celebrated. They were fatally wrong. When they emerged from the Senate House, their bloody daggers held aloft, crying liberty. They were met not with cheers but with stunned silence, which quickly turned to panic. The city descended into chaos. The senators fled, the people locked themselves in their homes, and an unnerving quiet fell over Rome. It was Mark Antony who broke the silence. At Caesar's funeral, his masterful eulogy ignited the fury of the crowd against the assassins. Instead of saving the Republic, the assassination had plunged it back into civil war, a conflict even more vicious and destructive than the one that had brought Caesar to power. The assassins were forced to flee Rome, now 100 men. The dream of restoring the old Republic died with Caesar. The power vacuum he left behind was not filled by the conspirators, but by a new generation of ambitious men. The civil wars that followed were a brutal struggle for succession. In the end, it was Caesar's young, unassuming great-nephew and adopted heir, Octavian, who emerged victorious. He methodically defeated his rivals, including Antony and Cleopatra, and consolidated his power with a political genius that rivaled Caesar's own. He learned from his great-uncle's mistakes, carefully cloaking his absolute authority in the language of the Republic. He called himself first citizen, but in reality, he was Rome's first emperor, Augustus. The assassination, an act meant to preserve the Roman Republic, had ironically triggered the very sequence of events that destroyed it forever. Out of the ashes of Caesar's fall, the Roman Empire was born, an empire that would dominate the world for the next 500 years. The name Caesar would no longer signify a man, but an emperor. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into history compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shaped our world.